Welcome to Soul of Travel podcast. I'm Christine, and today is a super special episode. Today, we're going to have a little behind the scenes look at Soul of Travel podcast, and I get to introduce you to my dear friend and colleague, Carly Oduardo, who is my content magician who evolved into my editor and basically my full support team. So I thought it would be a great opportunity to introduce all of my listeners to her. We're calling this our behind the scenes love-isode because it's coming out on Valentine's Day, and we want to share all of our Soul of Travel love, like the love we put into creating the podcast and the love we receive back. So excited. Welcome to the podcast, Carly.
Thank you so much, Christine, and listeners. It is so great to be able to connect with you. I'm just so excited.
Yeah, this is so fun for us. So we get to spend a lot of time talking together. And as we both prepared for this, we're so nervous, but I don't know why we should be, because we talk to each other all the time. But I guess it feels different when people are eavesdropping in on the conversation. But yes, as in all of our podcast episodes, I would love to turn it over to you first, Carly, to introduce yourself and tell our listeners a little bit more about who you are and the work you do.
Yeah, so I'm Carly Oduardo. I am a former teacher turned writer, and I have founded two companies, No One Story, and co-founded ConVerGente with my husband. He recently left the corporate world. So we are launching into this universe of entrepreneurship and owning our time and choosing what we want to do with our time. And my favorite thing to do is write. So one of the blessings that I get to do with Christine is listen to all these beautiful episodes and create content around it. And that's what I do with my time. It's my jam.
Yeah, which really reminds me, for listeners, if you haven't ever taken the time to go to the Soul of Travel website and look at each of the episode show notes, if you're watching the video, see my air quotes. If you're not, you have no idea that I'm doing them, but they're not really show notes. They are these beautiful blogs for each guest that kind of summarize the episode, but they also tell a beautiful story of each guest's journey. So, and if you're a guest listening and you haven't done it, you definitely should. I know you put so much heart and soul and love into each one of those, and they are like standalone, beautifully written pieces. So I feel really honored that that's what our podcast also puts forward with each episode. I want to share a little bit of our backstory with our listeners, because I think that's something that's fun and important in kind of this place that we've worked to create. And Carly and I met, I'm going to say almost 10 years ago, maybe not quite. Mm-hmm. And we were both working for an organization called Threads Worldwide, which is a fair trade jewelry company filled with really incredible women, founded by two women here, or three women here in Denver, that Carly and I are, became really good friends with. And in that space of all of these incredible women talking about impact and how to support themselves, and many of the things that we talk about here, how to manage our time, how to live lives that feel aligned with who we are, how to leave jobs and support ourselves doing something we love. We were marinating in that together for a long time. And we had a really beautiful moment at one of the conferences where we didn't know each other that well yet, but we really thought we liked each other, but we were both shy. So we would just sit by each other and just maybe hope it would rub off. It
worked.
It did work. We had to write an exercise. Usually the conferences were in January. So kind of what was our intention we were putting forth into the year. And so we're writing it and all these things and channeling all this big energy, and we got ready to turn to each other and share, and we both flipped our pieces of paper over, and it was write a book, both of us. Mm-hmm. And we looked at each other and we're like, oh, what do you like to write? You like to write? And then from there, just a really deep friendship, I think, of seeing each other and really championing what we saw as each other's magical gifts, and never letting each other stop believing in those gifts. Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's part of why Soul of Travel even exists. And I have loved seeing you go from being someone who always said, I want to be a writer, to someone who is a beautiful professed writer. So there's so many other things, but that's kind of
Yes.
like where the energy of our connection began.
Yep. Well said. You told the story beautifully. I
Thank
remember
you.
that moment. I will never forget that moment. It's great.
It was really powerful because I think it was like really, like we were both so scared to write down that thing that
Yes.
just felt like impossible and improbable. And then for it to be the same and then to like just see each other, it felt really like earth shaking. Like it was
Yeah.
a pretty powerful moment. And also, we were just talking before we hopped on here. We've had so many opportunities to travel together, which we're going to talk about a little bit later in this episode. But that is also so fun to look back at all these pictures from trips to Bali and Alaska and in Colorado and New Orleans and all these things that we have been able to do together, which I also think is special. Like I was thinking, I'm like, I don't think I've actually traveled with anyone outside of my family
Yeah.
more than you. So that's also really, really exciting. So I think as we just get into this episode, I think it would be so fun to reflect on our journey so far and on the podcast. I would love to hear from you, like some of your favorite moments. I know you've listened
Mm-hmm.
to every episode like me. So hopefully you're not the only person that's ever listened to every episode, but I feel like you have a good, you spend a lot of time in the energy of what we've been co-creating together. So I'd love to hear from you, like some of your favorite moments and things that you've taken away from all of these conversations.
Yeah, well, I have the gift of being able to see all of the threads and all of the stories that pass through all of the episodes. I am just always struck by how open the space is. Literally every conversation. I'm never like, oh, that was cringe. Like it's always amazing how open these folks are and how willing everyone is to share. That is just one of my favorite things about being able to listen to the podcast and being able to see that thread all the way through. Like if you just hear one episode here, one episode here, I think you feel it, but maybe you don't understand exactly how just monumental that is and how special that is. So that's definitely one thing. An episode that meant a lot to me personally was when Carla Campos came on the podcast and talked about Puerto Rico. So my husband is from Puerto Rico. When Hurricane Maria hit, I had a little baby, and he packed up his suitcase and went to the airport. And he said, "I don't know how I'm going to get there, but I'm going to get there." He had to be there with his family, even though everyone was saying, "No, don't come." He's like, it's for him, it was a need. And to go through that as a family and then have his family there going through this, and getting pictures back from him where, he's sitting talking to his dad with no lights, like all of this time he got to spend because of this horrible, horrible experience. But they went through it together, and then coming back and hearing about it, it's just something we went through as a family and meant a lot for me to hear about someone like Carla working for Puerto Rico, for the Puerto Rican people, doing everything possible to take care of folks and to make sure that everyone was safe, that everyone was fed. It was just one of the most, I'm always emotional when I listen to the podcast. Like I often, when I'm editing, have to pause and like get my tissues out. But that specifically was really powerful. And it helped me understand how tourism and travel and how these folks working in tourism and travel can really shape the future of a place just by being there, just by being willing to do the work in a heartfelt, open, passionate way. And if we show up um, as ourselves, as our most authentic selves, that's another theme that is just in every single episode. I think of like Tess Milholland with her house, and I look at really list everyone, but folks who made a choice to create something aligned with their soul's purpose and then did it, and then is following the thread of that story is just really, really incredible to watch and to hear and to see.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And I know Carla would be really touched to receive that. So I'm going to make sure she hears this episode. But yeah, I agree that that vulnerability that shows up, you know, that everybody brings to this space and tells the real story of their journey. That's what, I mean, even this season, as we kind of were like, how do we want to start shaping the podcast going forward? Now that we have all these seasons under our belt, what is it we've actually been doing? And that was one of the things, was like, okay, women are showing up and sharing who they are as people, even more than they are as professionals. And so that's where the women's wisdom part of the podcast came from. And even what I have heard from so many listeners, either people who have been guests that listen to the podcast now, or who just listen to the podcast and are loving the stories, that's what they resonate with, is like, I can't believe the stories the women share about their lives, or especially as professionals, if someone you're hearing from is someone who you've looked up to, or who is a mentor, and who you've only known as, you know, the chief executive officer of some major brand, you didn't know that they spent a year living in the back of their camper truck in South America with their husband, or, you know, you didn't know all these pieces. And then when you see those, then you start to understand why they have such a conviction for the work that they do. And for me, like, finding that thread is like the magic. And like, that for me is what the soul of travel is. Like, it's that part of each guest that just makes them so deeply connected to sharing that passion with the world, and then that possibility that exists within the industry, not just to sell trips or, you know, connect with travelers, but that possibility to really love and appreciate the world and heal the world. And so, yeah, I love that you shared how you have received that from the guests, because I think, again, like you said, as a collective, that's when you really start to see that energy. Like, one episode feels good, but like, if you listen to 10, you're like, holy cow, something is happening here.
Exactly. You can feel the movement. It's not just like a one-off thing. It's actual momentum moving forward in a lot of different ways.
Yeah. And I think for me too, that's been the thing that I've been most surprised by, because again, I knew so many of these women, so I knew they had interesting stories. I knew they're doing great work, but even creating like an infographic and putting 6 of their faces next to each other, I just like you, I'm like, okay, I just have to get a tissue and I have to like sit here for a moment, because I'm like, what the heck? All of these people together, I feel like they could like make the world start spinning the other way. Like, that's how powerful this community together feels. So I'm excited to kind of, we'll talk about this later too, but like, to look at what it might look like to truly gather these women together, and not just here in this container of the podcast. But before we get to all that, I want to talk a little bit more about travel itself. We already teased our listeners to let them know that we've gone to all of these places together. And part of that is through our own just travel experiences, but also you have joined me on 2 of my sojourns with Lotus Sojourns, which I'm so thankful for. It's always nice to have someone who, you know, is like, thinks they're such great experiences that they would come back. But I would love to talk to you about your own like mindful travel experiences, and how stepping into this space, both for these travels and your own travel experiences, has shifted how you perceive travel.
It's a huge question. It's perfect. I grew up without a passport, so I got my passport to go on my honeymoon with my husband. So my first years of actual travel outside of really Michigan and the Midwest and the West were very, very limited. I went to Canada like when I was younger. So my husband and I traveled. We got our diving certifications. We went to Belize. We went to all these awesome places, and it was incredible. And I had an idea of what travel was. Like, travel was going to see the world, meeting awesome people, having awesome experiences, full stop. And then I have to thank Threads Worldwide again for opening my eyes to international travel that could be so much more than that. So with Threads, we got to go to Guatemala and Bali. And that was my first taste of traveling with women. And like without my husband, like me as a traveler with a group of people. And I was absolutely hooked. So, Christine, when you started doing these tours, these experiences, I wouldn't call them tours, like small group, really intimate experiences, it was an absolute yes. My entire worldview had changed because of these trips that I had taken. And it expanded even further when I got to go to Colorado. Colorado, when we got to climb a literal mountain in Colorado, I should say. um, that was so powerful in so many ways. I mean, physically, obviously, mentally, emotionally, all of the things. But what was really cool about that sojourn was that we were a community before we even like stepped foot on the trail. So we would communicate in Marco Polos. And I just remember like being on the trail on one of my training hikes, like on Marco Polo going like, this sucks. Like, when does this get better? When does this get good? And then, 20 minutes later, checking in with the team and going like, oh my gosh, I get it. And I had all of these realizations and all of these just empowering moments that could not have happened had I not had the container. Like, it was just me out hiking, great. But because we were together sharing this experience, sharing this whole training experience, and then actually getting to the top of this 14er in Colorado, not something I ever thought I would do. It was just monumental, really. And I count it as one of the most powerful moments in my life, truly, and had nothing to do with my family or these roles that I had taken on for years and years. It had everything to do with just who I was and who I got to choose to be in that space. I liked myself a lot. And it was hard. It wasn't easy, but that specifically was an amazing trip. And yeah, it was great. And then of course, Alaska. Oh my gosh. I have to confess, I downloaded like the Aurora tracking app, and my husband will check over, like, what are you doing? And I'm just like looking at Aurora webcams multiple times a week, because that experience and it just being under the Aurora, north of the Arctic Circle was powerful, right? But to be there with an incredible group of people and have Christine facilitate conversations, not with any agenda, just like, what are you here for? What do you want from this experience? And yoga was involved as well. So I remember, one specific yoga experience in this incredible yoga dome that Molly Busby created just in the wilderness. You have to look up all the details. I'll share them in the show notes. But to be there and go through, it was something with breath work and something with like chanting. And I was like sputtering, just spewing out all of this energy that I had been holding back. It was, and I've done yoga for a while. I have never, ever had an experience like that ever. And I haven't since. And I'm, kind of chasing it like that. I felt like a different human being after. I felt like I had let go of some stuff. That's the kind of magic that can happen when we choose to show up, when we choose to show up together, when we have somebody incredible facilitating the process. Yeah, I'm addicted. Yeah. And for mindful travel too, it has changed how I approach my everyday life with my kids. So I have an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old, and we now travel in our neighborhood. Like, we employ all of these mindful travel experiences and this perspective into our daily lives. Sorry, like going to the park becomes an adventure, going out becomes an adventure, all of these things. I'm actually working on a project where with my kids, we're getting to know the neighborhood. We're putting together blog posts and we're sharing about what we've learned, because I didn't I didn't grow up here. I grew up in Michigan. So getting to know Colorado in this way through this like childlike wonder has been really awesome. And it's just another perspective that wasn't available to me, prior to all of these travel experiences with Christine and all of these amazing women. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. And as you were
Yeah.
saying the last part about bringing kind of that traveler's mindset and also using like this connection with your children as a way to move through and see your like local environment.
Hmm.
I just interviewed Kat Medina, and she and I were talking a lot about this. So if people are listening, that's such a great episode to talk about and hear about like how you move through the world when you're traveling, who you become when you're traveling, and then kind of creating a like really looking and reflecting at that and creating a list of here's the things I notice more when I travel, or here's the things
Hmm.
I do more when I travel, here's the parts of me I love more when I travel, and then like, okay, where are those missing today?
Hmm.
Which for
Yep.
many of us, it will be like, oh, yeah, well, all of those are missing today as I'm
Yeah.
running to the grocery store and then like 5 minutes late to pick up my kids and hurrying home to do all the things that we do. Um, I think it's so brilliant to try to pick some of those things and invite them back to your daily life. And then also just to go back and talk a little bit about the experiences you shared, because I mean, for me, those were super powerful as a person participating in the
Hmm.
experiences, as a person participating with dear friends in the experiences, and then also as the person holding the space and kind of
Hmm.
creating the container for that magic to happen. I For me, I don't even have words for that, but it was so incredibly powerful. And like with the 14er, as you mentioned, we spent a long time before that one, like
Yeah.
building the connection that we had and that we found out we needed when we got like 3/4 of
100%.
the way up the mountain. Like if we didn't have what we built before, I don't know that we would have all made it. But we
Hmm.
spent 3 months like doing some physical training with our friend Becky Rupp at Trailblazer Wellness, and Carly will link that episode in the show notes. And then we did some spiritual growth practices. We heard from a tribal elder that was sharing about the land
Yeah.
and telling us how we could honor where we were hiking. And we did some practices when we arrived on the mountain to align with that. And like all of those pieces as they came together were just incredible. And then for me, we got almost to the top, and all of a sudden we had this little like straw width ridge in my mind, and the wind is blowing like so hard. And we're almost there. And the last thing we have to do is cross this to get there. And
Yep.
like my fear of heights is making my hands like sweat right at this moment. And so I like sat there clinging to the like last big boulder before that with another one of our travelers who was having some very similar anxieties.
Hmm.
And I was like, okay, like Mama Earth, if you ever listen to me, please just like ease up on your wind, because I definitely can't get across this thing thinking I'm going to fall off. And like, just give us the strength to do this together. And everyone showed up, like some hand holding, some very
Hmm.
gentle like support, and we all made it to the top of that mountain. And it was incredible. Like you said, it wasn't just about this hike, it was like who you became through that journey. The
Yeah.
woman that stood on the top of the mountain was not the same woman at the bottom of the mountain, and who we were together were very different people, and who we are since for each other, I think, is also really special. And I think that this much level of intention doesn't go into every experience when we travel, but when
Hmm.
it does, it's just like un it's really there's no words. As I'm not finding words, there are no words. It's magical. And in
Yeah.
Alaska too, like again, there was a lot of physical elements to that trip. There were natural elements. It was cold. We had to pee outside when it was very cold. It was breathtakingly beautiful. Like we
Hmm.
had a 9-hour drive or 8-hour drive to get there, which at first we were like, oh, let's figure out how to bypass that. But that
No
drive
need.
was kind of like that 3-month container that by the time we arrived at the village that we then had to hike up to where we were staying, we had created something that would be the
Hmm.
thing that would help us navigate the rest of our time there and to love on one another and support each other. And then for me, it was particularly special because I got to really lean into some of my gifts that I don't always honor. And again, like Mama Earth was like, we're going to show you like some real magic. And we had a beautiful yoga practice, our first one. And like, just so jokingly, like, I'm like, everyone now open your eyes, return to this space. And I was like, and let's see the northern lights. And then like, I looked at all of your faces and you're like sobbing, and I turn and like the northern lights are literally there. I was like, oh my gosh, what just happened?
And the coolest thing was it started when you said that. It because I don't know if listeners have seen the aurora borealis, but sometimes it starts just as a little streak across the sky, and it's sort of like, what is that? And then just feel, and that's exactly the moment Christine said, turn around. It was starting from basically nothing and growing into something super incredible.
Yeah,
it's cool.
Our host, she was like peeking at the little window of the igloo, like just waiting for us to finish because she knew they were coming. And she was like, oh my gosh, okay, everybody put your shoes on and get outside. But yeah, so like, I think for me, it's so special to get to share those experiences with you. And then that's the kind of thing, because we have experienced it, that like we see it in our guests and we hear it in their stories. And then we get so excited to just like continue to push that forward, because I think you'd agree, you just want every person to have that experience, because it's life altering. Like it truly changes who you see yourself as and how you see the whole world, like the natural world, all of the people in the world. Like it's really powerful. So I love that we like have that foundation that feels really unique. And I think for us, part of one of the things that we always joke about when we are working together is like, we get ready to end a call or in Zoom and we're like, okay, love you, bye. And then I was thinking like, wait, that's not normal, is it? I'm like, I like it, but is that normal? And then I like realized how many calls that I have with people that in that way, and that we have really intentionally tried to call in people to work with us, like Becky that has helped to support that Sojourn, other people that have done things for the podcast when we've been in conferences and connected, working with Carolyn Ray at Journey Woman. Like everybody who comes to this space kind of comes with the like, love you, bye energy.
Yep. Hugs.
Yeah. Like so many hugs, tears, like realness. And I think it's such a privilege to be in that space. And as I've talked with people, we have someone who's going to come on and do some guest writing to support your writing as well the next couple months. And that was one of the like questions I had. I'm like, this is like a real space of love and connection. And like, I really want people here who want to be here. This isn't a job. We don't really need someone to do this, but we would love to add more value by kind of looking back and reflecting and writing stories that honor even more parts of women's journeys. And and that like, that was what she saw. She's like, I just want to be a part of whatever this thing is you're creating. So for me, I think that's great. And I think it also really extends to the guests that participate on the podcast and the listeners. And like, we get that love back and forth from them, which is great, because when it's just you and I, and we're like, how are we going to get this episode out? Our kids both have like everything that they have, whether it's sicknesses or ball games or whatever it is. And we just think about that thing and we're like, okay, not only does that fill me up, but it gives me like the thing that allows me to then continue to create. But I would love to have you share any of the love that you've received as we've been working with guests, and I'll share as well. But
I have the pleasure of sending the guests their assets. So before a podcast airs, saying, here's all your stuff. Feel free to share. Your blog post is going to be live, details. And without fail, I'll get a response like, I was so nervous and it ended up so beautiful, or thank you so much, or just the gratitude that comes back. And I think the love that we put into creating all of these assets is really appreciated and seen. We got a recent response from Tara or Tara, sorry.
Tara. Yeah, Tara. It's
Tara.
okay.
Okay. Okay. So we recently got a response from Tara Bush. She's the founder of the Conscious Travel Collective, which is, you have to go look it up. It's very cool. I'll link it in the show notes. She was nervous to listen to her episode back, which is really common. Like, I'm nervous to listen to myself and edit myself after this. But she was nervous and then said, well, now that I've listened, I can say the conversation was just as warm and fuzzy in the replay as it was in real life. Christine is such a dream to speak with. I agree. We went on a deep dive that exemplifies what I hope all conversations will feel like. And we bond over a shared passion for deep connection and traveling in a way that honors our values, creating companies that do the same. Yes. Conscious Travel Collective is a wonderful example of the type of business we can create when we lead with all our heart. And I would absolutely say Soul of Travel, Lotus Sojourns is one of those types of businesses too. We get to show up and be ourselves. Like Christine said, if there's anything going on, we just let each other know, and we get to show up, and we get to say, I can't show up in the same way. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think I don't love hearing from guests that say they're too nervous to do the podcast, but I also do love hearing it, because I can't even say how many people like land in the Zoom and they're like, I'm so nervous. I'm not sure if I can do this. I don't know why anyone might want to hear my story. Are you sure this is, there's all these things, right? And then we prepare, we do the interview, and then on the other side, they're always like, gosh, one, that wasn't what I thought it would be. Two, that was so easy and so natural. And three, you saw something in my story that maybe I didn't even see in my own story, or maybe I had forgotten about. And for me, like, again, that's also such a huge part of what I wanted Soul of Travel to be, is this kind of reminder of why we really are doing this. Like, what is that soul essence of our businesses, being reconnected to who we are. Like, I think so many people get disconnected from that in the daily grind of operating their business. And then when they get to come back to it, they're like, oh my gosh, yeah, I haven't felt this way about my business in a really long time. Or I haven't even heard myself talk about my business that way before, which happens a lot in conversations, and actually is sparring another product that we're going to be launching soon, which I'm really excited about, which is helping people to kind of tell their brand story in a really soulful way, and creating some quick video and audio content that they can share. So we'll be sharing more about that later, but that's not even today. Later, this is a super tease. Like later, it'll be coming to listeners for that opportunity. The other thing I wanted to really touch on, because it's been, I think, a place of growth for us and so helpful, is how we can show up at work. And you and I have gone through some major ups and downs and ringers, and I don't know exactly. We'll see what the universe is teaching us on the other side of this, but it's been hard. It's been really hard. And I think that foundation of respect and care for one another as humans first has really been helpful. Like, I don't think either one of us would have been able to do this, or would have wanted to do it, without knowing that we could send that email that we don't want to send, that says, today, I can't do this. This deadline, I know it messes things up. It can't happen. And the courage and the strength for both of us to get to the place to even send that email, and not just grind through and make ourselves feel worse, which I know we've both done in the past, it's been huge. So I feel like it's not been fun to have that experience of not feeling well enough that we have to send that email, but being able to find it in ourselves to create this space to heal in, and still like very gently keep the podcast rolling, which is, I feel like, where we've been like really tenderly producing the podcast the last probably 4 months, even since I returned from my world trip, that didn't become a world trip, which is its own tender moment. But I'm really grateful that like we have been able to have this space together. And I think a lot of other women on the podcast, this is something that comes up in my conversations, like sidebar conversations, is what do you do when you're a solopreneur, or what do you do when there's only one or two people in your business and something happens in your life, you know, a family tragedy, a natural disaster, a personal health crisis. How do you keep going? Like it's when you're the one person holding all the pieces, it's really it's scary to say, I'm just putting you down right now. But what has your experience been like with that in the last few months?
Yeah. Well, I'll say first is there is zero fear that when I put it down, I won't be able to pick it back up again. That, you know, the harm or the damage or all of these like horrible things I think I'm doing when I say no, or when I, you know, draw a line or I create a boundary or something, is that I think I have a fear that these consequences will be like far reaching, like the world will stop turning if I mess up, in quotes, in air quotes. And with Soul of Travel, it has just been about open communication. And I know that that's the number one thing. So I've been in and out of the hospital last winter, and now I'm having some lingering health effects, trying to get diagnoses and trying to see doctors. And it's really interrupted my everyday life quite a bit. And it wasn't until I recognized that, no, this is everyday life. Like I have to just accept what's going on in each moment and say what I need to say. I've like you, Christine, always looking for the gifts in the lesson. I think that has to be one of them that I just keep having to learn over and over. But never did I fear, like, if I send this text to Christine that we have to postpone this 1 week, is she going to be mad at me? And I'm like, of course there's disappointment and there's scheduling and all of the things. But when you have an environment where you can show up and be honest, then you know that you're safe to be honest. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I've learned working with you, working with, you know, my other clients who are just full of grace. And I've intentionally, it's one of the cool things too about being able to create your own business, is intentionally choosing the people you work with. And, you know, having people you can say, this is what's going on, being open about things, being honest about things, and then whatever the consequences are, the world literally will continue turning. It will be okay. And having folks that can reflect that back to you and just remind you, like, yes, it will. The most important thing right now is health and wellness and well-being, and approaching each day with an open mind, and instead of frustration about the things I wish I could have done had I been feeling better, or if I didn't have these symptoms, I could do so much. Like you can't live in that world. It doesn't work. So
yeah,
that's just the last 2.5, 3 months. And it extends way beyond that, but yeah, it's all gratitude.
Yeah. And I think for me too, and you also know, because you've supported me in all of these things, but I like to have a lot of things on my plate, and I like to like start this thing and start this thing. And
can't relate at all.
No, sometimes it's too many things. We'll be real about that. But also then prioritizing, because like you're really excited about the thing that just like sparked your energy and your curiosity, and like you want to put all your love towards that, and then you forget you have these things on the to-do list that are like a little more in the want category. And so then not feeling well, I just have to keep this little list. I have like the sticky note that's just like the immediate priorities, because like maybe I might have energy for one thing on the list that day. And then just going back to that. And then the gift, I hope, is being able to kind of keep doing that. And then, like you said, noticing that if I didn't get the 50 things done, actually things still kept moving with even some ease and some grace. And it's like, oh, maybe I don't have to do the 50 things every day. Maybe the 5 things every day that then also allows me to heal, even if I'm not sick, but just heal from daily life, giving
Mm-hmm.
yourself a little space. Yeah, I hope. Ask me in 6 months, but I hope that this is something that I can take
Yeah.
forward from this time. Well, I know we don't have a full hour together, so before we like run out of time,
Yeah.
I want to celebrate some of our milestones that we've had together. I'm so grateful, like I said, to share this with you, and it's even more special to share milestones with someone who I know is like equally like in love with the like success,
Yeah.
it's very special. So I just wanted to share that looking back, like our first podcast was recorded back in May of 2020. This, for our listeners, was I recorded a YouTube series at the time. I actually had no idea what I was doing at the time, but I invited all of these incredibly talented and passionate people to partake in something that I think I said podcast or something like it. And they all somehow agreed. Our first guest was Gabriella Stoll, who's now the Vice President of Regional Development at the Adventure Travel Trade Association. And we just got to reshare her episode because it was the most popular episode of season 1. And I think really just a great like rock to build the whole podcast
Yeah.
on, which I didn't know at the time, but looking back, definitely that is the case. And then we officially launched on Apple Podcast on February 4th of 2021. So this is kind of a happy birthday. We're recording this on February 5th. So yeah, just like the podcast launched on Apple and all the other platforms. We did the mini season of the first 10 episodes. And then I had a whole other season. Season 2 kicked off with Laura Greer, who is an amazing travel photographer. And now we're just reaching the goal of 30,000 lifetime downloads, which I just can't. Again, there's kind of no words for that. I remember seeing like 300 downloads the first week, and I was like, that's it. That's all I have to do. That I feel like a success. 300 people listen to this podcast. And now there's listeners in 113 countries and almost 2,200 cities. And our top countries are US and Canada and UK, which are not as surprising to me, but I love seeing like the next ones that come in are like Ecuador and Australia. And for me, I just like visualizing all these people like popping onto whatever app it is that they're listening to and hearing from my guests and hearing their stories, and then hearing from them later on that, they listened to this episode with so-and-so and they realized this idea that they had actually could be something they could bring to life, or they didn't know women could show up in adventure travel space this way, or, all these different comments. So for me, like that thread, to go back to threads worldwide, but that thread is the thing I think that is so important, and really fun for me to see, because I didn't even know how to imagine it in the beginning, is seeing the podcast pop up on like top charts, which is really hard to do like in Canada and the US, but it's also like the number 4 podcast in Belize all the time. I don't know what that means. I don't know how many travel podcasts there are in Belize, but it's still really cool. I'm going there in March, so I don't know, maybe it'll be
awesome.
like being Beyonce in Belize. Probably not, but a girl could dream. And then the last one that I'm really, really proud of, and you were there with me, which is always special. I literally wouldn't have gotten to the stage without you, because I was just sitting there waiting for the actual winner of the awards to walk up there.
I turned to Christine and I go, it's you. Like they said you. And you're like, no.
I was like, I'm sure that's not what happened. And everybody's like looking. So I was like, oh, I guess it was me. But the podcast received the Bessie Award from Wonderful as the brand that has gone above and beyond to support and empower and represent women in the year that I was nominated. And for me, that was really special, because it's amongst a community of women whose voices I feel are so important. And Beth Santos is like such a powerhouse in the industry. So to just even be recognized and receive the award from her was really, really special for me as well. So yeah, I feel like it's just really cool. Sometimes you forget what you've created while you're in the middle of creating it. So it's helpful to look back and just like see some of those things.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, and one more shout out. I have to honor you, Christine, and tell everyone that in 2023, if you don't know this already, you need to, that Christine was named Travel Pulse's one of the most influential women in travel. And in November, was also recognized as one of the game changers, women entrepreneurs who are disrupting the travel and hospitality industry by women leadership. Um, I know it's hard to like accept accolades and talk about yourself, Christine, but you deserve all of the awards. And if I could nominate you and ensure that you win all of the other ones too, you would. So
Oh, thank you. I mean, I appreciate that. And yes, it's hard to receive it. That's one of the things we're growing through. But
well,
also
yeah.
for me, like it just says how important it is that women's voices are being heard and that what we are doing is in fact something really special. I wanted to share some of our most popular episodes, but I don't want to run out of time for the rest of our podcast. So just really quickly, if you go back, we've done a few re-airings of top episodes. I definitely just want to shout out our most popular episode of the podcast ever was with Shay Sane, who's the executive director of Black Girls on the Go. And our podcast was about healing and mental wellness through travel, which I think really just also is a great example of what people are hearing here that they're not hearing other places. And honestly, that episode was really hard for me to even get through in parts because Shay was so vulnerable. She was so honest with her experiences. She was so honest with why her life experiences led her to create her business. So for listeners, it's not number one without good cause. Like it's a really beautiful episode. Also, we've mentioned Tess Milholland. Her episodes were like the number 2 and number 5 most popular episodes. And also this season's our most popular episode so far is Traveling Fearless and Packing Light with Dawn Booker of Pack Light Global. And we've had a few episodes that are really popular around solo travel. So we'll put the list in the show notes of all of these episodes so you can go in detail and look and see some of the most popular ones. If you haven't already listened, it's a great place to kind of start. But what I would really love to talk about before we do our rapid fire-ish questions together, which Carly's so excited that she finally gets to do that, is I really want to talk about what we need to keep the podcast going. So we're in our 5th season. As we said, we just celebrated our 3rd year of being streaming the podcast and sharing the podcast as a podcast and not just this conceptualized idea. But what we really need right now is your support as listeners. Like we love the feedback we receive on a regular basis. We would love for you to share the episodes with friends and colleagues. If you are someone who has a newsletter, who's on social media, if you can just drop an episode and why you loved it, because I think that's what resonates with other women listeners, industry professionals. Men do listen to the podcast too, so we won't discount that they're not a part of the audience. I appreciate their support as well. So I'd love for you to do that, to share in that way, to just continue to grow our listenership and to continue to amplify the voices of our guests. Like I said, that connection, you just never know who's going to hear your story or hear a story that resonated with you that will really change their own experience. And then most importantly, we really need financial support to keep the podcast going. For me, this has been a labor of love. It has been a great joy to do it, but I feel like it's time to grow this into a business. We really hope you're feeling the love and energy in this love episode and in this podcast. But we want to look at this as a business and not just this powerful forum for gathering women travel leaders and telling the story, but we want aligned sponsors to really help us keep this space alive and thriving and moving forward, because like I can't see the day of putting this down, but if I look at it with like some business goggles on, it could be a reality. And so yeah, we just want to talk to our listeners about how you can get involved to support and make sure that that doesn't have to happen. So I'm going to turn it over to Carly to give you some of the details.
Yes. So as a podcast consumer and fiend, I know that ads permeate podcasts all the time that are sometimes you fast forward and sometimes you're just like, oh, why is this in here? This is not for me, whatever. Christine works really, really hard to make sure that anybody sponsoring the podcast is thoughtfully chosen and that Christine is telling a story in the ads that she writes painstakingly and records and thoughtfully creates. So if you're signing up for an ad, the single episode ad spaces start at $600, and you're going to get so much more than just like a 30-second like spiel. You're going to get Christine caring about your brand and speaking about it in a way that really conveys how much it means to her. And she won't put anything in there that she doesn't feel that way about. It's just who she is and who we are at Soul of Travel. And we are also looking for additional founding sponsors. The Trafalgar Travel Corporation is our first founding sponsor. They have a 12 ad package, and that's something that's available as well if you have sort of long-term goals for getting more viewership, getting more audience, growing your audience in this way. That's definitely available to you. And if you don't have your own business, and if you're just a listener of the podcast, take out the word just, because you are so powerful and impactful, and just sharing the podcast with the people you know, or if you know someone who owns a business and that would be a good fit, please share the opportunity to take that ad space, because it's there, it's available, pre-roll, mid-roll, post-roll, and you'll get mentions in the blog posts, in social media, all of the things. It's worth it. It's well worth the investment. We believe it's generous. So please consider that. And if you are an individual looking for a way to support the podcast financially, Christine has set up donations through PayPal. And that's something you can do as well anytime. This is, free content, essentially. Like, we're not Amazon Prime over here charging, they increase their prices like $3 a month, but for a huge number of people, that puts it out of range. So this is always going to be free for listeners. But if you are somebody that connects with Soul of Travel, or that has grown a business or had some gain in your life or some kind of jump forward, we would really appreciate a thank you back in the form of money. We're not afraid to ask for it. So we really appreciate all of the shares, the likes, the downloads, all of those things. And just that PayPal link is one other way that you can support the podcast, and sharing to potential sponsors or becoming a potential sponsor yourself is yet another way.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I appreciate you sharing how I create those ads. And I would say, even like, I've done a few for our allies recently, and I've received like text back, like, I'm crying. This is so beautiful. Like, this isn't what I expected at all. And like, that's really what I want to show. Like, they are kind of standalone, even like a mini-sode in of themselves. And like, even working with Trafalgar, they're like, we're so excited to tell a different story of our brand, to tell about the things that maybe isn't the perception, or is it's like something we're so proud of, one of our values, and you really want to feature that, and that makes them feel really proud of what they've created too. And they're a huge brand. They could be anywhere, but I'm so grateful that they are really helping us to bring this podcast forward. And yeah, like Carly said, it just looking for a few other brands that can really help us take this to the next level. I'm going to share all of these future offerings that we want to create a little bit later, because I know Carly does need to go, and I want to quickly allow her to answer the rapid fire-ish questions if we still have time. If not, we can always post-production add it later.
We have to do it.
Okay,
it's happening.
Let's do it. Okay, so what are you reading right now?
Wow. I am rereading The Alchemist. I am reading a romance novel called The Kiss Quotient. And I am reading Wintering as part of our Lotus Soulful Book Sojourn. I almost call it the old name, Soulful Book Sojourn.
Yeah, thank you. That's been so good.
Mm-hmm.
What is always in your suitcase or backpack when you travel?
You think I would have this like right at the tip of my brain, but getting asked the question. Um, what's always in my suitcase or backpack is probably my phone charger. Um, and not because I remember it, but because I have packing lists and structures in place with my traveling partners to help me remember it because I am notoriously bad at forgetting my chargers.
Yeah, I have the list too and forget them, and always my
Yeah.
toothbrush. And there's probably extra pajamas
Yes.
for me in your suitcase too, right?
I always have
That
an
has
additional
happened.
pair of PJs for Christine. Yes.
To sojourn is to travel somewhere as if you live there for a short while. Where would you still love to sojourn?
Morocco. I don't know what it is about Morocco. I haven't been there. I've been to Spain, but just something about it is drawing me constantly. And I like will dream about it and I'll be thinking about it and then a show will come up like Anthony Bourdain visits Morocco or something. So there's a pull.
I love that. And I know the perfect operator for you to travel with if you go there.
Oh, yes.
She is incredible. We can link
Awesome.
that in the show notes
Yes.
too. But what is something you eat that immediately connects you to a place you've been?
um, hmm. So in Puerto Rico, they have something called pinchos. They are grilled meats and in barbecue sauce. And there's a piece of bread at the end, like soft bread that just collects all of the barbecue sauce. That puts me on the beach in Puerto Rico every time. And we try to make them here. It's not quite the same, but yeah, pinchos.
Who was a person that inspired or encouraged you to set out and explore the world?
My grandmother, who did not do a lot of travel that I know of in her adult life. She had 5 kids. She worked so hard every single day, but she was also a writer and would write about the adventures that her grandkids had. And I know if she had been in a different generation or if she was even still here, we would be traveling together.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this may, in fact, answer the next question, but if you could take an adventure with one person, fictional or real, alive or
Yes.
past, who would it be?
My grandmother, but also my daughter. I think she is just the bee's knees. This kid is amazing. And getting her in novel situations is always fascinating to see how she's going to react. And um, she also takes the world very seriously. She's always looking to learn from it. So just taking her with me, and I know we'll travel our whole lives together, but she's a little young now to do that kind of thing, more often than I would like. So yeah, my daughter.
Yeah. And the last question, Soul of Travel, is for honoring and recognizing women in the industry. I know you help me do this every week, but is there someone that you love
Yes.
to recognize in this space?
Yes, it's Vinci Ho, the founder of the Rise Travel Institute. When I decided to become a writer and be a writer and said that I was a writer, I started volunteering for Rise. And it was the first time I saw myself as someone who could contribute in a huge way because of the incredible organization she's created, teaching mindful and responsible travel practices to families, to teachers, to grown-ups, to kids, to everybody. So thank you, Vinci.
Yeah, she's one of my favorite people in the industry as well. And I know we definitely have spent some moments celebrating Rise together as well. So thank you for mentioning her. And thank you so much for all the things. There would also be no words for that. And for sharing this really fun behind the scenes love-isode with me. And I hope our listeners had a good time hearing a little bit more about why we do what we do and why the podcast is so important to us. And like what a joy it is to create it together. So thank you so much, my friend, for being here. I really appreciate you.
Thank you for having me. Thanks all you listeners out there. Love you so much.
Thank you.